And I'll just start with muting all, and then any question, comment, feel free to unmute and interrupt. And here comes Marlene. And um, okay, so we left off um, chapter 1 um, at verse 18 on page 5. And in the midst of so I'll say the bracha in a moment, in the midst of the story of Elkanah and his two wives, Penina and Hannah. Penina has children, Hannah does not, and at their time celebrating a festival in Shiloh, Hannah takes advantage of that time to pray, um, and Eli, the high priest, sees her moving her mouth and thinks she's drunk. And she says, "No, I'm pouring my heart out to God." And Eli says to her in verse 17, where we left off, "May God answer your request." Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we continue verse 18. We'll do 18 through 20. It looks like there's a break there.
I
Vatomer.
just have to say
Yes.
that all of these stories that we've been reading, so
Yeah.
many, like this one especially, is
Yeah.
such a foundational story that I've heard. And it's
Yes.
so nice to be able to, in this class, to be able to put it in the context, follow what came before and what's coming after, knowing
Yeah.
what's coming after.
Right.
When I, in this
Yes.
class last week, but I read it and I went, oh, that's that story, which, was
Right.
great.
That's right. That's right. And I was thinking before as well that Samuel, the book of Samuel, starts in a very different way than the book of Joshua and the book of Judges started. So Joshua just gets right to the point of moving into the land of Israel. And Judges, let me just be reminded about how Judges started. Just one second. Just looking in ancient Israel for that. Um, One second. Happened at the death of Joshua, the Israelites inquired of the Lord, "Who will go up for us?" And the Lord said, "Judah will go up." And um, and so um, yeah, and it's just continuing the saga of who's leading the people into battle. Here, Samuel takes a shift, and we're not talking about settling the land of Israel or conducting battles. We're starting with one family and dealing with a family crisis that could have been, well, we know from the Torah that this is not an uncommon occurrence of infertile women trying to um, become fertile. We have that with Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel. So perhaps then Samuel is fitting us back in, or the author of Samuel is 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 providing us a way back in to a theme of the Bible that is very different than Joshua and Judges was, and that perhaps is more of what we, the reader, expect a biblical book to be, right? In other words, I would imagine most people turn to the Bible for spiritual inspiration. And I would argue that Joshua and Judges would not be the place for that. We would go to the Torah, we would go to the book of Psalms, other books like that. So perhaps Samuel then is, I don't know what its intention is. I'm just pointing out that as we begin the book, it's a stark contrast to the books that we just finished. That's all, just to think about that. So, verse 18. Vatomer timtza shifchatcha chen be'enecha, vatelech ha'isha ledarka, vatochal ufaneha lo hayu la od. So she said in response to Eli, who said to her, may your question be answered, or your prayer or your request be answered. She said, may your maidservant find favor in your eyes. Just a formal kind of thank you to Eli. Then the woman, why she's not called Hannah, but she's just called the woman. So the woman went on her way, and she ate, that is, partook of the sacrifice or the offering for the festival. And literally, this means she didn't have her face anymore. So, which clearly does not mean literally what I just said, but rather, as the English translation here says, and her countenance was no more sad. So I wouldn't go that far with the translation of this. I mean, literally, what I just said, the words mean she didn't have her face anymore, meaning she didn't have her mood anymore. Whatever mood she was in that prompted her to pray, that mood was lifted. So I think that that's what faneha means, her face. So it's the same as in the priestly blessing, the middle line, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha vichuneka. So that is usually translated in the old way, may God's countenance shine upon you. But it's the word panim, so it's interesting. It's one face, but the word in Hebrew for face is panim, which is a plural word. Can't figure that out, but I guess linguists would have a lot to say about that. What does that mean, that a singular face in English, the English word being a singular word, in Hebrew is a plural word? I mean,
Other words.
what's that, Marlene?
Also say, could it also mean something like physical, like if she didn't have her face, maybe she, covered it either, I don't know, with a veil or with a scarf as she was leaving him. I don't know.
So I'm not sure. I don't think so, because I would only say that I think that the Bible would tell us that she put a veil on, because we've been told of that in other places. So I think that panim here. Let's see. Alter translates it as her face was no longer downcast. So he keeps the word face for paneha. Paneha means her face. So lo hayu la od, he translates as was no longer downcast. So that's a stretch too. All I'm pointing out is that our English translation here and Alter have to understand that the Hebrew does not mean what it means literally. And so we have to understand, so panim here is like the line in the priestly blessing, may God shine his countenance upon you and be gracious to you. What does it mean for God to have a face? So yes, we can anthropomorphize, that is, attribute human attributes to God, even body parts, but in a way to try to make a connection to an abstract being that God is, but perhaps in a more abstract way. It doesn't mean God's face, but God's countenance, or or God's light. So I simply translate, may God's light shine upon you and be gracious to you. So, which is why I chose that line to be under the window in the sanctuary on the eastern wall to kind of get a sense of the light shining in from the window from the east, that we should understand it spiritually as God's light shining in. So the idea of panim, this human body part, the face, taking on a more psychological meaning here is the sense of what's happening here, and we have that in English language too, using we have phrases about body parts, about different kind of emotions as well. So, okay, I'm just pointing out that the phrase here, she didn't have her face anymore, is unusual. 19. Vayashkimu vaboker, vayishtachavu lifnei Adonai, vayashuvu vayavou el beitam haramata, vayeda Elkanah et Chana ishto, vayizkareha Adonai. So they got up in the morning, or the next morning. They bowed down before God. They returned and came to their house in Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife. So in this context, knowing is a sexual intimate act, and God remembered her. So it's just interesting. I'll just point out, it's just interesting that he waited until they got back home to do that, as opposed to doing it there at Shiloh. So I don't want to get more into the sexual discussion, but I wonder, the pilgrimage festivals to Jerusalem when the temple was standing was a time that you're spending the festival in Jerusalem. And it's understood that you're living with your family in Jerusalem and celebrating the festival. There isn't a sense at all in rabbinic literature that any kind of behavior, specifically being intimate with one's spouse, is prohibited when you're in Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festival. So I just wonder if perhaps there was a sense that it should be prohibited back in Shiloh. And maybe it could be related to one of the reasons why the pagan practices of the Canaanites in the land of Israel was abhorrent was that part of the pagan worship was the extreme sexuality that took place there. And perhaps the Israelite response to that is not to have any kind of intimacy at all when bringing a sacrifice to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. Just what came to mind, as I think it just the author of our book is making a point in saying that when they got back home is when Elkanah and Hannah were intimate, and that's when God remembered her. Okay, so that means that she got pregnant. 20, Vayahi litakufot hayamim vatahar Chana vateled bein vatikra et shemo Shmuel ki me Adonai she'iltihu. So when After a period of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son, and she called his name. So it's interesting, she names him. Elkanah doesn't name him. She's allowed to name him. She names him Shmuel. Why? Because I asked for him from God. Now, Shmuel might, so the name, it reminds me, Shemuel reminds me of the name Yishmael. The difference between Yishmael, that's Abraham's first son with Hagar, is named Yishmael, right? The difference there is the letter Ayin. So if you just look at the word Yishmael, Yishmael has a yud in front of it, and instead of a vav, has the letter Ayin. Okay? So Yishmael means El, being God, Yishma, heard. Here, you could theoretically say the same thing, that instead of an ayin, you substitute an ayin with a vav, and it just makes the name sound better. You could still say it could mean God heard, but she's saying it means Ki me Adonai she'iltihu. So from all those words, she's kind of creating an acronym of Shmuel that I asked of him from God. So that perhaps the mem is mean, from, and the shin is the reference to the sha'al, to the ask, and el is God. Okay, so, all right. Let's look at the commentary below on the bottom of 5. Let thy servant, etc., an expression of thanks. Sad, not in the Hebrew text, but to be understood. And 19 on the left on 16, remembered her. See on verse 11 and see Genesis 30, verse 22. Other references in the Bible for God remembering a woman and making her pregnant. And then 20, when the time was come about, explained by Kimchi, medieval commentator, and others as at the end of the period of gestation. So that's reading a lot into tekufot hayamim. I translated it as a period of time. So clearly the period of time here is the 9 months of pregnancy. Okay, so if you just take that extra step, but it's again, it's not needed to take that extra step in order to translate it as the period of gestation, because the rest of the verse tells us what the period of time is. She conceived and gave birth to a son. So that's the period of time. Okay. But then the following phrase, that Hannah conceived, would be out of place. The phrase is better understood as at the coming round of the new year. Okay, maybe. But again, gestation, pregnancy is 9 months, not 12 months. That is at the next season for Elkanah's annual pilgrimage. Verse 20 would then be a parenthetical passage. Now Hannah had conceived and had born a son, and I called his name Samuel. So it's possible, because the next verse tells us about Elkanah and the family going up again to sacrifice to Shiloh. Now that it could mean in context sacrifice in honor of the birth of a son. Or it could be while the next time has come around. But the thing is that it wouldn't take 3 months to spend time in Shiloh and then get back home. That would be ridiculous. And then if everybody were to do that, how does farming happen then? Right? So a pilgrimage can't take up too much time that it can't take away from farming the land and bringing the very produce that you need to bring when you come for a pilgrimage, right? So if the pilgrimage takes longer than being able to work the land, then it kind of defeats the purpose of having a pilgrimage. Okay, so let's see what Alter says about this. If we turn to Ancient Israel on page 244. So the only comment he has is she called his name Samuel. There is a small puzzlement in the Hebrew because it is the name Shaul, not Samuel, Shmuel, that means asked or lent, right? So that's why I was pointing out to you, going through the letter by letter of his name, that it's kind of an acronym in order to understand what she means, what she intended by naming him Samuel. That from God I asked for him, is reading a lot into Shmuel. Shaul, the first king of Israel, Shin, Aleph, Vav, Lamed. Take out the Vav, you have the word Sha'al, which means ask. So that makes more sense for that name to be, he was asked for. Okay, so then Alter goes on. This has led some modern scholars to speculate that a story originally composed to explain the birth of Saul was transferred to Samuel, perhaps because Saul's eventual unworthiness to reign made it questionable that he should merit a proper annunciation scene. So that's interesting. So some biblical scholars suggest that perhaps the book of Samuel really should be the book of Saul, and that this first story is about Saul's parents and not about Samuel's parents. But because Saul ended up being rejected by God, right? Because we'll read about it, but he's the one who tried to fulfill the commandment in the Torah to annihilate the Amalekites. And what he did was keep the king of the Amalekites alive. His name was Agag, and kept the flocks alive. So Samuel said, "How dare you do this? What is the sound that I hear?" And this is it's a haftarah. It's a haftarah for Shabbat Zachor. It's coming up. Always the Shabbat close to Purim is that special Shabbat in which we read the story from the book of Samuel about the destruction of the Amalekites. Because the king was Agag, and in the Purim story, Haman is an Agagite. So that makes the connection between the story in Samuel, destruction of Amalekites, and Haman, which is why that story is there. And it's interesting that the word "what" in the story, like Samuel asked Saul, "What is the sound I hear?" A Bible teacher at the seminary taught me this. There in the Bible, it says meh instead of ma. And if we imagine the flocks of sheep, meh, meh. So what is the sound? I had to remember the Bible teacher teaching that about that. So meh sometimes is used instead of ma for grammatical reasons, but perhaps it's there, the author, to be a little bit funny of how Samuel might be talking to Saul at that point, but then he gets rejected. Now, and then Samuel says to Saul, God is done with you. And then there's another story in which Saul goes to the witch of Endor to raise Samuel from the dead and kind of plead with him one more time. And so when we'll get there and we'll talk about that. The Torah clearly says that you cannot go to a witch or a sorcerer for any reason. And if you do, you're put to death. You're excommunicated. And if you're following the Daf Yomi cycle, that's what the today's page and yesterday's page was talking about. What kind of execution is it when going to or doing yourself sorcery or witchcraft. Anyway, so we'll get there. So the idea that Saul was rejected perhaps made this story have to shift to be a story about Samuel instead of a story about Saul. Okay, so Alter goes on, but it must be said that the only evidence for this speculation is the seeming slippage of names here. That could easily be explained as by the 13th century Hebrew commentator David Kimchi, as we assume Hannah is playing on two Hebrew words, Shaul Me'el, that is, asked of from God, or asked of God. Shaul Me'el, that's kind of a cumbersome name. Shaul Me'el, Shaul, if you say it fast, could become Shmuel. Maybe. Okay. In any case, biblical writers allowed themselves considerable license in etymologizing names. You gotta love Alter for using these 10-syllable words. So etymology is understanding the root of a word. Okay? So etymologizing names. Yeah. It's like, okay, it's like Alter and probably other scholars. You can imagine them at like a dinner party, sharing the big words that they know. Okay, okay. So we go on. Let's see if we can finish the chapter in this go 21 to 28. So Vayal Haish Elkanah v'chol beito lizboach ladonai et zevach hayamim ve'et nidro. So the man Elkanah and his household went up to sacrifice to God the annual sacrifice and his vow. Okay, so I'm not sure what his vow is, but the annual sacrifice we know because we've already been introduced to that. But what his vow is, we'll see. V'chana lo alata ki amra leisha ad yigamel hana'ar v'havi otiv v'nir'a et penei Adonai v'yashov sham ad olam. So, and Hannah did not go up because she said to her husband, so le'isha, so the hey with a dot in it and the vowel under the shin means hers. So her husband, so because she said to her husband, so now the word isha means woman, but isha with a dot in the hey, so by looking at the word, you can tell the difference because of the dot in the hey. The pronunciation, there are some people who will say, if there's a dot in the hey, they'll do like that. So isha with an extra breath at the end to point out that there's a difference between isha meaning woman and isha, her man. Okay, so she said to her husband, until the boy is weaned, and I will bring him and will see the face of God or appear before God, and he will stay there forever. Right? Remember, she had made that conditional vow to God when praying for the child. If you answer my prayer, then he'll be dedicated to you for life. So this is how she is understanding the dedication, in that she's going to give him up once he's weaned to Shiloh, to the sanctuary there, forever. Okay. 23, Vayomer la, the same thing, la, to her, Vayomer la Elkanah isha, Asi hatov be'enaich, shevi ad gamlech oto, ach Yakem Adonai et devaro, vateshev ha'isha, vatenek et bena ad gamla oto. So her husband Elkanah said to her, do what is good in your eyes. In other words, I accept what you're saying. Stay until you wean him, and then God will keep God's word, and the woman stayed there and nursed her son until she weaned him. 24.
Wait, Jonah,
Yes,
before
go
you
ahead,
go
Marlon.
on.
Yeah,
So
go
the
ahead.
word, okay, but we have, so I didn't know that gomel here means wean, because we have gemilut chasadim or gomel
Right.
chasadim, when we do the prayer for somebody who wants to
Yes.
bench gomel, right? So
Right. Yes.
does it have, so it has more than one meaning, that word?
Uh, so let me see.
Oh, good, because Hebrew, the same three letters, gamal, isn't that a camel?
Right. Yeah, Gamal is also a camel. That's right.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
right. So I'm
Okay.
just pulling off a dictionary off my shelf. And so a really good Hebrew English dictionary is this one by Alkali. Okay. So if I do Gimel Mem Hey, Gimel Mem Lamed, just one second here. Okay. So there are a number of versions of the word gamal here. So gamal number 1 with the T vowel, the kamatz under the gimel, and the straight line patach under the mem. That is to ripen, also to wean. So weaning and ripening makes sense, right? A child is ripe when they're done, when they can be independent and drink on their own. So that's like they're of age, they reach a certain age. So that's that. Now, it also, with the same vowels underneath it, it also means to recompense, to remunerate, reward, requite, repay, reimburse, render. So that is for gemilut chasadim. So it's interesting. I don't know how the two can be from the same word. So I'm trying to be creative in my mind. How does to ripen and to wean mean this, be from the same word to remunerate or to reward? I don't know. Yeah. So, and then gamal as a camel is the T vowel under the gimel and the T vowel under the mem. So the vowel under the mem is different. Effectively, it's pronounced the same way. So you can't tell the difference between it. But yes, camel is from that word too. So I have no idea why that is. Now, also a gamal with a patach under a gimel and the T vowel under the mem is a camel driver. So okay.
So, Rabbi,
yes, go ahead, Dov.
in modern Hebrew, you don't see vowels, and
Right.
everything is.
You have to know it from context.
Yes, and
Yes.
and
That's
that
right.
makes it really hard.
It does make it hard. But see, from the Bible, you have the Masoretic text. So you have the official version with vowels, is like the Aleppo Codex, is one of the oldest manuscripts of the Bible with the vowels in it and the trup marks in it. Okay,
Wow.
we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the oldest version of the Bible we have, 2,000 years old. These scrolls, they don't have vowels in them. So what the vowels do is that this group of people known as the Masoretes put them together and created based on the accepted way in which every single word in the Bible is to be pronounced and to be sung with the trup mark. That's the version that we have. Now there are discrepancies, and but the version that we have, and sometimes there'll be an asterisk over a word.
Hooray.
Anywhere in the Bible will say that this is how it's written,
Yeah.
this is how it should be pronounced, and sometimes says some versions pronounce it this way. So, yeah, so there's not 100% uniformity in all manuscripts, but this is the best we can do. Now, and the pronunciation is important. On a word like gamal, I mean, it's clear from context whether it means a camel or to wean. But other words, it might not be such a big deal. But other words, if it has a halachic implication, it's really important to know how to pronounce a word, because it could either be understood as this is something that you need to refrain from, or something that you're allowed to do, depending on how you then could theoretically pronounce a word. Okay, so we're still left with a conundrum, and maybe somebody can look this up as an extra credit project, how to understand weaning and remuneration from the same word. Okay,
You wean yourself from a debt.
Okay, yeah, but the Gemilut Chesed is so the weaning. Who's doing the weaning? So Hannah is weaning her son, but her son is being weaned. So it's something done to him while he's a baby, but she's doing the weaning. The Gemilut Chesed, the act of kindness, is done by somebody to somebody else, right? You're giving tzedakah, you're doing a charitable act. That's Gemilut Chesed, or you're asking God to do it to you. So I don't know. It's interesting to try to understand how the two ideas are related, to be the same word. Okay, 24. Vata'alehu ima ka'asher gemalatu bifarim shlosha ve'efa achat kemach ve'nevel yayin vatevi'ehu beit Adonai Shiloh v'hana'ar na'ar. So she brought him up with her when she weaned him. So we imagine he's like 3 years old, with 3 cows. It says 3 bullocks. Yeah, okay. So, okay, so they're male. So 3 male bulls. I guess that's redundant. And a measure, an ephah, a particular measure of flour, and a container of wine. And she brought him to the house of God in Shiloh. And the boy was a boy. Now, what does that mean? And it says here the child was young. Okay, so he's young in that he was just weaned. So again, we imagine that's about 3 years old. It could be 5. I don't know. there are those in the breastfeeding world who, keep breastfeeding their child until they're 5 or 6. That's unusual. Well, I don't mean anything derogatory by that. I just think that that's unusual because mostly people are done breastfeeding by 1 or 2. Okay. We'll see in the commentary what they say about that. 25, Vayishchatu et hapar, vayaviu et hana'ar el Eli. They slaughtered the bull, but there are 3 bulls that were brought. They slaughtered the bull, and they brought. So who's the they? Who's doing the slaughtering? And who's doing the bringing? They brought the boy to Eli. So the other priests, was it Elkanah and the family? Who's the they? 26, Vatomer, Bi Adoni, Che nafshecha Adoni, Ani ha'isha hanitzevet imcha bazeh lahitpalel el Adonai. So she said, oh my Lord. So Bi Adoni. I guess that's the best way to translate that. Oh my Lord. May you live, or long live, my Lord. I am the woman who was standing with you here praying to God. So she's reminding him from something 3 years ago that Eli is supposed to remember, I'm the woman who prayed to God. Assuming Eli's going to remember that maybe no other woman has prayed to God since or before, so it'd be easy to remember. She could have said, I'm the woman that you thought was drunk, but I was praying to God. But she just said, I'm the woman who is praying to God. 27, El Hana'ar Hazeh hitpalalti, Vayitain Adonai li et she'elati, asher sha'alti me'imo. It is for this boy that I prayed, and God gave me my question, that is, answered my prayer that I prayed from him, or that I asked of him. 28, V'gam anochi hish'iltihu la'adonai, kol hayamim asher haya hu Shaul la'adonai, vayishtachu sham la'adonai. So here's a reason why scholars think that this is a Shaul story and not a Shmuel story. Because, and I also promised him or loaned him to God. It says, I have also lent him to God. Yeah, I guess, I also, but it's the same word, sha'al, to ask, but it also means to loan or to borrow, because you're asking someone if you can borrow something. So there's that. I see a connection between for sha'al to be asked and to borrow, because you're asking, but weaning and remunerating is harder for me to see a connection. But anyway, so I also loaned him to God all the days that he's alive, Asher Haya, that he is. All the days that he is, he will be loaned to God, Shaul, loaned to God, and they bowed there to God. Okay, so let's look at the commentary on these. Yes, Barry?
The tradition of the Pinya Haben of buying back the firstborn, is
Yeah.
that per father or per mother?
technically it's for the father to do for his son, but it's understood that, well, it's, I think technically the son is supposed to do it, but how can a 31-day-old baby do that? So the father does it for the sake of the boy. Because if the father hasn't done it, the boy still needs to be redeemed. So when the boy grows up, the boy can still do it to do his own Pidyon Haben for himself.
Well, I
But
was wondering I mean, this would be her first son, but
right.
the other wife had sons already. So would
Yes,
there
so
be
we don't have, as far as I know, the Bible does not have a story of Pidyon Haben happening.
okay.
It has stories of children being dedicated to God and their firstborns, but we have the commandment to do Pidyon Haben, but we don't have a story in the Bible showing how it was done.
The commandment in the Bible is
Yeah, in the Torah. In the Torah, it
Torah.
says that the firstborn, a naturally born firstborn male has to be redeemed.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the commentary here, back on page 6 of the bottom left, the yearly sacrifice, see on verse 3, his vow, either the vows, the singular being used in a collective sense, which he had made in the course of the year, or a vow made at the birth of his son. Weaned at the age of 2 or 3 years. It's still the common practice in the East to suckle a child for 2 years. And there is evidence that in ancient times, some children were not weaned until the age of 3. See 2 Maccabees, chapter 7. O my son, have pity upon me that gave thee suck 3 years and nourished thee. Some commentators have found it difficult to suppose that the child would have been committed to Eli's care at so early an age, and have interpreted the phrase figuratively, as at the age when he was independent of his mother. So again, we don't know, because in the story, so that, again, this is the Haftarah for the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And the first day of Rosh Hashanah Torah reading is about the birth of Isaac and the weaning of Isaac, and a party that Sarah and Abraham throw on the occasion of his weaning. And at that party, she sees how Ishmael and Isaac are playing, and because of that, Sarah tells Abraham, get rid of Hagar and Ishmael, because I don't like the way Ishmael was playing with Isaac. So we don't know how old Isaac was in that story. So the weaning then, was he 3? Was he 5? Was he older? We really don't know. So the same thing here, understanding the story. Who gives up a 3-year-old to strangers, and how are these strangers, these Kohanim, able to raise him properly? So perhaps he's old enough for regular school. Maybe he's 5 or 6. We really don't know. Yeah, Deborah.
Well, I thought we figured out that Ishmael was 13 when
he
Isaac
was circumcised. He was
Right.
13. Ishmael was 13 when he was circumcised, and that's when Isaac was 8 days old.
Yeah,
So this weaning party happens after that.
right. So we
So we don't know if Isaac is 3, then Ishmael is 16. But we don't know. There are some scholars who suggest that Isaac was 37 when brought up to Mount Moriah, as old as that. Even though the story, read on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, makes it seem like he's a young person, younger than a teenager. But we don't know. The Torah is cryptic. Yeah, Ron.
The priests would have had wives who could have taken
Yeah,
care of the young
that's true.
child,
Yeah.
and possession of a child was basically paternal, right?
Yeah, but the woman is in charge of his
Right,
daily
but the
needs.
man's in charge of the woman who's in charge of the child.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. But the woman here is kind of has a more active role in
Yeah.
deciding that I'm going to be the one to bring him. It's like, in other words, Elkanah should have brought him and said, "This is like her vow is his vow." Like, how is a woman allowed to have her own vow? She can, in some circumstances, she's
permission.
allowed to, but men are allowed, husbands are allowed to annul the vows their wives make.
Right, but Elkanah validated Hannah's vow and
Validated it
saying,
by letting
yeah,
her do this. Yeah, no,
do
absolutely.
what's good in your eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. But yeah, I guess the Bible just put that there to make sure that people understand this is not a progressive women's lib book. But that just to say, don't worry, Elkanah approved it all. But yeah. So anyway, about his age, so we don't know. So the last comment on page 6, forever, that is as long as he lives. Page 7, his word, unless Eli's words in verse 17 are to be accepted as a prophecy in God's name, and therefore as a promise that all that Hannah had prayed for would be fulfilled, no express promise of a son had been mentioned. But Samuel's birth implied that Hannah's prayer was heard, and Elkanah prays that it may receive a complete fulfillment. She took him. Elkanah is not mentioned as accompanying her, but it is clear from chapter 2, verse 11, that he did so. With 3 bullocks, wine. Ehrlich suggests that these were not for an offering, but a gift to Eli. Perhaps 2 bullocks were part of the present, and a third was sacrificed. The child was young. Literally, the child was a child, a vague term giving no clue to Samuel's age. The bullock, one of the 3 which had been brought specifically as an offering in connection with Samuel's dedication, either as a thanks offering or as an offering at the fulfillment of a vow. I also, that is, I on my part. He worshipped. If the pronoun refers to Elkanah, we are to assume that, as the head of the household, he worshipped while Hannah poured forth her heart in the hymn of praise which follows. If, on the other hand, it refers to Samuel, it would be better to render he bowed down to the Lord. He would be too young to worship. So, Vayishtachu Sham Ladonai, and so it's not they bowed down, he bowed down. So that's why it could be Samuel bowing down.
Jonah, so in my
Yes.
note in the JPS that says Vayishtachu Sham Ladonai, they're saying that it's really reading in the Talmud in Brachot implies that Elkanah was there. So
Right. So that's what's
Yeah.
suggesting that
right,
who's doing the bowing.
right,
What doesn't make sense? Okay.
right. So like Ron said about Elkanah, right,
Right.
gave his approval.
Yeah. So let's look at altar, and then we'll finish for the day. Back on 244. 21. The yearly sacrifice. The annual cycle of iterative actions invoked at the beginning is seemingly resumed, but everything is different now that Hannah has borne a son, and she herself introduces a change in the repeated pattern. Votive pledge, although this is the same Hebrew term neder that is used for Hannah's vow at the beginning of verse 11, its most likely referent here is a vowed thanksgiving offering on the part of the husband for his wife's safe delivery of a son. Till the lad is weaned, the word for lad, na'ar, is quite often a tender designation of a young son. Though it typically refers to an adolescent, or even to a young man at the height of his powers, David uses it for the usurper Absalom. It evidently can also be used for an infant. Nursing and weaning, compare the end of this verse and the beginning of the next verse, are insisted on here with a peculiar weight of repetition and literalness. This usage surely intimates the powerful biological bond between Hannah and the longed-for baby, and thus points to the pain of separation she must accept, whatever the postponement, according to the terms of her own vow. In the arc narrative that follows, there will be a surprising recurrence of this image of nursing mothers yearning for their young. At this point, the only other indication of her feelings about the child is the term lad that she uses for him. We will see the Lord's presence, or even more concretely, the Lord's face. The anthropomorphism of this ancient idiom troubled the later transmitters of tradition sufficiently so that when vowel points were added to the consonantal text, roughly a millennium after the biblical period, the verb "we will see" nir was revocalized as nir he will be seen, yielding a more chastely monotheistic "he will appear in the Lord's presence." What your mouth has uttered, the Masoretic text has his word, but a fragment of Samuel found in Cave 4 at Qumran reads, "what your mouth has uttered," which, referring directly to Hannah's vow at Shiloh, makes much better sense since God, after all, has made no promises. A 3-year-old bull. This is again the reading of the Qumran Samuel text. The Masoretic text has 3 bulls, but only 1 bull is sacrificed in the next verse, and 3-year-old beasts were often designated for sacrifice. Right, so it's just interesting. We're looking, again, the Masoretic text from 1,200 years ago versus texts that we had before. And texts that we had before try to reconcile certain problems in the text. So pointing out the Dead Sea Scrolls and Samuel, what is it? Was it 3 bulls that she brought? Or was it a 3-year-old bull? So you can change the words by just adding a letter or taking away a letter to mean what you want it to mean, to have it make more sense. So in 246, they slaughtered the bull, they brought the lad. The plural subject of these verbs is evidently Elkanan Hannah. The simple parallelism of the brief clauses is eloquent. Both the bull and the child are offerings to the Lord, and Samuel's dedication to the sanctuary is surely for the parents a kind of sacrifice. It may be relevant that the term lad, na'ar, is precisely the one used for Isaac when he's on the point of being sacrificed, and for Ishmael when he's on the brink of perishing in the wilderness. Perhaps that background of usage also explains the odd insistence on "the lad was but a lad" at the end of the preceding verse. Given the late weaning time in the ancient world, and given Hannah's likely impulse to postpone that difficult moment, one might imagine the child Samuel to be around the age of 4 or 5. "Please, my lord," as in their previous encounter, Hannah's speech is full of deference and diffidence in addressing the priest, a reverence we may already suspect that he does not entirely deserve. "For this lad I prayed," she spells out the act of petition and its precise fulfillment, insisting twice on the root shin, aleph, lamed, to ask. The Hebrew is literally "my asking that I asked of him." Granted him for the asking to the Lord, all his days he is lent to the Lord. The English here is forced to walk around an elegant pun in the Hebrew. In the kal, in the grammatical conjugation, sha'al means to ask or petition. In this other form, hifil conjugation, the same root means to lend, and the passive form of the verb sha'ul can mean either lent or asked. "And she bowed." The translation again follows the reading of the Samuel fragment discovered at Qumran. The Masoretic text reads, "and he bowed," a difference of 1 initial consonant in the Hebrew, but it is Hannah, not Elkanah, who has been speaking for the last 2 verses. So Alter suggests, based on the text at Qumran, that she's the one bowing and not him. So would that be Vayishtahu? It would be Vatishtahu, I guess. With a taf instead of a yud at the beginning of the word. Okay. We'll stop here for today. We'll continue with chapter 2 next time. Have a good rest of the day, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.